You have two choices: stay where you've always been and have a solid yet unspectacular career, or take a chance on the unknown to see what your full potential is. Scott McTominay picked the latter, and oh my, was that a great decision. Stay tuned to see how he went from a solid squad player to fan favorite Serie A MVP champion.
Delivers McTominay! Napoli's most valuable player!
And be etched into Napoli history. At just 5 years old, McTominay joined Manchester United's development center in Preston. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the most skillful, but coaches quickly noticed something that set him apart: his willingness to learn, his focus, and his refusal to quit. Between the ages of 14 and 18, McTominay's development was disrupted by a brutal growth spurt, shooting up nearly 14 inches in 2 years. It came with injuries, coordination issues, and real doubts about his future in the sport. At one point, he nearly fell out of the academy system entirely, but McTominay kept showing up, kept putting in the work, and slowly, painfully began to catch up. In July 2013, he signed his first professional contract with Manchester United. By the time Scott McTominay earned his first senior contract, he wasn't considered a future star. He was just dependable. But sometimes that's exactly what a team needs. And in 2017, Jose Mourinho agreed. At a time when Manchester United was stacked with big names and even bigger egos, McTominay was the total opposite. Quiet, focused, tactically sharp. So when Mourinho needed someone he could trust, someone who would follow instructions without question, he gave Scott his debut, away at Arsenal. No hype, no grand entrance, just a quiet nod from the bench. But that one appearance opened the door. McTominay started getting minutes, off the bench, in the cups, even in the Champions League. He was tall, physical, and didn't overcomplicate things. Mourinho loved that. So much that he literally created an award just for him, Manager's Player of the Year. But here's the thing, under Mourinho, Scott wasn't unleashed. He was controlled. His role was simple: protect the back line, win the second balls, stick to the system. It was football in a straitjacket, and for a player just trying to survive, it worked. But thriving? That wasn't on the table. Not yet. He finished that season with 23 appearances, no goals, no assists, but he made an impression as the guy who could be counted on. The problem was, that kind of role can keep you safe, but it can also keep you small. And when Mourinho left and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer walked in, the question was simple: would Scott McTominay stay boxed in or finally break free? If you're enjoying what you're watching so far, please drop a like on the video. When Ole Gunnar Solskjaer stepped into the United dugout in late 2018, there was a clear shift in tone. Less tension, more freedom, and most importantly for Scott McTominay, a belief in youth. Solskjaer liked him. McTominay started getting more consistent minutes, and with them came a new layer to his game. He wasn't just holding shape anymore, he was driving forward, covering ground, winning tackles, starting counters. There were games when he looked like the most switched-on player in the entire midfield. And then came the moment that made everyone stand up. December 2020, Manchester United versus Leeds. Inside 3 minutes, McTominay scores not once, but twice, 2 goals into the same corner, one with his right, one with his left. It wasn't just a great performance, it was a Premier League record, the fastest brace ever scored from the opening whistle. That night, people finally started asking the question: how good is Scott McTominay actually? Under Ole, he made over 100 appearances, scored 10 goals, added 5 assists, but more than stats, he became reliable, trusted, a go-to option in big games. And every time United needed someone to anchor the midfield battle, McTominay was thrown into the fire. But still, it felt like he wasn't playing in his best position. He stayed professional, kept his head down, but deep down, you could tell, Scott was ready for more. When Erik ten Hag arrived at Manchester United, he brought with him a blueprint, a style rooted in possession, technical precision, and positional intelligence. It was clear this was a new era, and for Scott McTominay, it was either evolve or become expendable. At first, Scott fought his way in. He started the season alongside Fred, doing what he always did, covering ground, closing space, following orders. But then came Casemiro, a 5-time Champions League winner, and with that one signing, McTominay's place in the team was no longer guaranteed. The minutes started drying up, the spotlight shifted, and once again, Scott found himself back where he'd started, fighting for scraps. But he never gave up. In fact, some of his biggest moments at United came during this so-called decline. October 2023, United down 1-0 to Brentford, the clock ticks into stoppage time. McTominay comes off the bench and scores twice. In 4 minutes, he single-handedly wins the match and walks off the pitch like nothing happened. He scored in the Champions League, he bagged a brace against Chelsea, he captained United at Anfield, and in the FA Cup, he turned up big, scoring against Liverpool, then again in the semi-final, and starting the final against City. By the end of the season, he had 10 goals, 3 assists, and 43 appearances. Not bad for a player who technically wasn't even in the manager's preferred 11. But even with all that, it was obvious Ten Hag's system was moving in a different direction. And no matter how hard he fought, McTominay wasn't going to be the centerpiece. He could stay, collect a paycheck, be the reliable backup. Or he could roll the dice, bet on himself, and walk away from the only club he'd been at for 16 years. And that's exactly what he did. Because what waited for him in Italy wasn't just redemption, it was renaissance. When Scott McTominay signed for Napoli in the summer of 2024, nobody flinched. There were no viral announcement videos, no massive unveiling at the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona, just a £25 million deal and a quiet exit from Manchester United. But what came next? No one saw that coming. Under Antonio Conte, McTominay wasn't just a backup plan, he became the main man. Conte saw what others ignored, a tireless box-to-box midfielder who could dominate space, push the line, and score when it mattered most. And so, instead of using him as a destroyer like most of his previous coaches, Conte pushed him forward. The change was instant. He scored just 25 seconds into the match against Como to score his first league goal. Not a tap-in, not a lucky bounce, a perfect arrival into the box like he'd been playing Serie A his entire life. And that was just the beginning. In October, he bossed AC Milan at the San Siro, netting a goal and running the midfield like a seasoned veteran. By mid-season, he had already scored against Roma, Lazio, and Fiorentina. That Fiorentina goal, a 90th minute winner in a wild 3-2 comeback. Fans called it the McMoment. Every game felt like another chapter in his redemption arc. Juventus came in January, and McTominay responded with a brutal 90-minute shift, out-muscling their midfield, intercepting passes, and creating counterattacks that tore Motta's men apart in a 2-1 win. And then came Torino in April. Title race alive, Napoli neck and neck with Inter. McTominay scored a brace. 2 goals that put Napoli back on top. At that point, he wasn't just Conte's enforcer, he was Napoli's heartbeat. By the end of the season, McTominay had 12 goals and 6 assists in 34 league games. That's more than he scored in his entire United career. He led the league in duels contested. He had the most opening goals scored. He ran more than almost any player in Serie A. And then the finale. Final day, Napoli needed to beat Cagliari to secure the Scudetto. The stadium was packed, the pressure unbearable. And in the 41st minute, McTominay did something nobody expected. He launched into a scissor kick. Clean, powerful, unstoppable. The ball hit the net. The stadium erupted. That goal didn't just break the deadlock. It broke Cagliari's spirit. Lukaku sealed it with a second, but the night belonged to Scott. Napoli were champions. And when the final whistle blew, it was someone no one would have predicted at the beginning of the season holding the MVP trophy. It was McTominay. Serie A Player of the Season, the man who carried Napoli to their 4th title, the overlooked midfielder who rewrote his own legacy in a single season. Now ask yourself, was this luck? Or has Scott McTominay always been this good, just waiting for the right team to let him loose? Because what happened in Naples wasn't a breakout. It was a rebirth. And the next chapter? You have to wait and watch.